The story time I'm about to share is one of the most intense and horrifying stories I've ever gotten about thinking someone's your soulmate and then they're really not. Trigger warning on this one if it's violent, okay? It does get violent and there's some very disturbing things in this story. But this came from a girl named Jen who told me just to change her name and everybody involved. And it starts in the 90s. So Jen was 14. She was dating this guy named Randy, I'm calling him. She's 14, he's 17. And it's like a first love type situation. They hook up for the first time. She writes about it in her diary. Her dad is deputy chief of police in their town. He reads her diary, finds out about it, goes to Randy's house, puts a pew-pew in his face, and that's the last time she ever hears from Randy. So, like, they're done. Fast forward to 2007. Jen had married some other guy. Now they're separated. She's got 4 kids with this guy, so she's moving back in with her mom. Sadly, her dad took his own life in 2002, and this will become relevant in a minute. Also, yes, I'm on the floor. I'm dressed like Adam Sandler. I'm in the trenches of motherhood here. So after Jen moves back in with her mom with her kids, one night she's feeling kind of lonely. She logs into MySpace because this is during MySpace era, and she finds Randy on MySpace. She messages him, and he seems to have let the grudge go because he messages her back. Basically, all her dreams about him come true. He says he's a construction foreman, that he is recently divorced also, and that he has a beach house in Sarasota. Jen and Randy are talking every single day for about 6 months. One day, Randy says, hey, I want to fly you out to come see me, because Jen was living in Texas at this point. She's totally down with it. She arranges for her mom to keep the kids for the weekend, and she flies out to see Randy in Sarasota. She gets there. He does have a beautiful beach house that backs up to like a river or a canal of some sort. She does notice that the house is like kind of sparsely decorated, but he basically just says, my wife took a lot of the furniture in the divorce and I'm redecorating. But his house was beautiful, and she flies back to Texas after a few days and is like totally ready to start her new life with him. After she's there, they are still talking every day. Everything's going well. He says, hey, I'm going to come see you in Texas. So he flies to Texas, meets her kids, stays with her and her mom and her kids. Like, everything is fine. But when it comes time for Randy to go back to Florida, he starts coming up with all these excuses on why he doesn't want to leave. He's like, we've been apart for so long. We just reconnected. Like, I can't leave you yet. And she's like, no, really. Like, she said she was getting her divorce finalized. Like, she had a lot going on. So she's like, no, really, like, go back. And he's like, no, why don't you marry me? And he proposes to her on this trip. And she's like, no, I'm not ready to get married again. And he takes this kind of to heart, but he leaves. After he goes back, he sends an email to her mom, and he basically asked for her hand in marriage, which she thought was strange because she was like, I literally told you no. She said it was just moving way too fast for her, but he's like, can I come see you again? She's like, yeah. So he comes back to see them and stay with them in Texas. And that's when things started to get ugly. One night he's over there, he hears her 2 older sons get into some kind of argument in their room. So he goes in there, he starts yelling at them, and he tells her oldest son that he's fat and that he's never going to amount to anything. She hears this and she walks in there and she's like, get out, like, we're done. He walks into the kitchen, grabs a sharp object, and then walks out of the house. She said she didn't care what happened to him as long as he left. That next morning, her mom found him on the front lawn self-harming, and they basically told him that he needs to find his own way to Florida and he's not allowed back in the house. He leaves, he goes back to Florida, and things settle down for a few weeks. She deletes her MySpace. She's like, I just need a break mentally from him, and everything is normal. She thinks she's done with him. And then one day she gets a strange email from a woman in Florida. She had found her somehow via Randy's brother. I'm not sure all the details on that, but basically she informs Jen that all of the things that Randy had told her were a lie, that she was the actual owner of the house in Florida and that she had hired him to remodel her house. She found out after the fact that he had been staying there while she was out of town because he knew she was out of town, and he had also stolen checks from her and forged those checks. One of those checks was used to buy Jen's plane ticket to go visit him in Florida. Jen does some digging. She finds out that he actually was divorced, but that the divorce ended so ugly that he actually had a restraining order on him and he wasn't allowed to contact his ex-wife or his children. She also finds out that he was a con man and that he had done prison time in another state for theft and assault. But then it gets worse. She starts receiving messages on the answering machine at her mom's house about how he's sorry and he misses her and he wants her back. She obviously doesn't call him back. One day she's at the store, she trips and she scrapes her knee and like rips her pants. When she gets home, she checks the answering machine and she sees that she has a message, and it's from Randy, and he says, you looked cute today when you fell. I hope you didn't hurt yourself too badly. I was watching you from the scope of my pew-pew, you effing bee. When she doesn't call him back, she gets another message from him saying, no wonder your dad unalived himself. I would unalive myself too if you were my daughter. There were other messages that she described, but I'm not going to go into detail, but they're really bad. And so this is now like bordering like stalking behavior. He starts leaving messages saying he's going to unalive her, her kids, her friends. It's getting really bad. Then on Christmas Day, police show up to her house and she has no idea why. And they say they got a report basically that her kids were being abused. The police basically tell her they cannot tell her who called in the anonymous tip, but she knows that it's Randy. And she obviously lets the police check on her kids. They see that they're fine. She lets the police listen to all of these messages from Randy, and they're like, whoa, you need to file a charge. Sorry, like, you need to make a report about this. So she goes in, she files a report, and they start the paperwork to get a restraining order against him. Things settle down again, and then CPS shows up again, and they say that they got a report that she was beating her kids with a leather strap. Obviously, they check on the kids. Everything's fine. She explains the situation. But then they come again to check on her because somebody has now reported that she is being held hostage against her will by her mother. But because she's getting so many reports and tips to CPS, they start investigating her. And so this is like a whole process. They obviously drop all charges because they can't find anything on her. And then there's a call to her stepfather's work about how he's drinking on the job, which they investigate, don't find anything. And obviously all of this is Randy. But then things settle down again. Come to find out, the reason that it settled down is because she finds out that Randy is back in jail. A couple months go by, she starts feeling safe in her home again because she hasn't heard from Randy. One February night, her boys are all asleep. She lets her pug, Daisy, outside to pee. It's dark outside. She calls for her dog. Her dog doesn't come back. So she walks out in the yard to look for her, thinking maybe she escaped the yard somehow. And she notices something white on the windshield of her car. So she goes over to look, and she sees her dog, who has been unalived. It's extremely graphic in the way that it was done, so I'm not going to go into detail there. Extremely sad, extremely violent. She said although she loved this dog, her immediate thought was like, go inside, check on the boys, because she knew that she was probably being watched at that very moment. So she goes inside, checks on the kids. Her phone starts ringing. She answers it. It's Randy, and he says, next time it'll be you and your kids. She calls the police. They come out. They look for him, can't find him, but they make a report. A couple nights later, she's in bed. She hears something tapping, like somebody's knocking on a metal pole. She grabs her pew-pew, she goes outside, and she sees Randy standing in the driveway. He took one step toward her, put his hand in his pocket to grab something, and she fired at him. She said her dad had always taught her to aim for the biggest part of the body, and that's what she did. But she didn't unalive him. She did shatter his clavicle and shoulder, and charges were filed, but ultimately those charges were dropped because castle laws in Texas are pretty clear. She said her pew-pew was initially taken away, but was eventually given back. After that happened, Randy didn't bother her anymore. I guess that's what it took for him to finally go away, but she said that she fears that he has moved on to his next victim. She said it's taken her nearly 20 years to tell this story, and she is still healing from it. So she'll be reading these comments even though her name has been changed. She said she shared this as a warning to always trust your gut, and if things seem too good to be true, then they might be. Jen, I hope that sharing this was healing for you in some way. Just know that we're on your side. Everybody else, stay safe, stay vigilant, keep sending me your spooky, scary stories and the things that you think people need to hear.